Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf podcast. So today I'm talking about motorcycling in general, but I'm talking about specifically, are you safe on a motorcycle?
RevelatorAlf.
Well, the simple answer is you are and you aren't at the same time. It really depends on how you are as a rider, what the conditions are, that kind of thing, how you interact with other traffic on the roads, how you read the road. Lots of different factors come into play to determine the safety of a motorcycle. Now, you know, in its bare essentials, it's just a mode of transport. It's something that as riders we sit on and it gets us from point A to B, regardless of the emotions, regardless of the theatrics, regardless of you know what it means to some people. In its fundamental state, it is a mode of transport, just like the bicycle, the car, the lorry, whatever it is. How you get from point A to point B really determines how safe that travel is. Now, because there isn't any protection around the rider, basically you're very vulnerable to injury. Now, one of the things that I would always tell people when I had the Motorcycle Safety Initiative heli bikes, which I ran for about 10 years or so, or certainly involved with gathering all the data for about 10 years, was that regardless of the safety equipment that you're wearing, you know, whether it's boots, leathers, helmets, so on and so forth, if you're riding at a certain speed, let's say, and you have a crash and you hit something solid with your body, the chances are you're going to have very serious injuries, if not fatal injuries. That's just the name of the game. To believe that any protective equipment is going to protect you 100%, you're living in cloud cuckoo land. It's not going to happen. I always say that the best form of motorcycle safety is actually doing everything that you possibly can to avoid having a motorcycle accident, but still being able to enjoy it at the same time. So, you know, a lot of my efforts were to do with rider awareness, hazard perception, anticipating where hazards would potentially occur and how they would develop, and how you as a rider could anticipate but also react to those hazards occurring as well. A lot about riding motorcycles is, and what a lot of people have a misconception about, is that they are inherently dangerous. Well, they're not inherently dangerous. It's just that when something goes wrong, it goes wrong quite dramatically, and the chances of you coming away unscathed are quite remote. And possibly that's what lends itself to a lot of people wanting to ride motorcycles in the first place. It's that kind of unknown, it's that kind of sense of danger a little bit. You have to marry that up with the realistic expectation of having an accident or having a crash, and the realistic expectation of being able to survive or being able to recover from your injuries as well. So let's say, for example, I go off-road riding a lot on my bike, and, you know, right in the middle of nowhere I could be riding. And many people say, why do you go off riding by yourself right in the middle of nowhere? What about if something happens? They're absolutely right. If something were to happen, then I would be exposed. But at the same time, you know, I have my mobile phone with me. I am never that far away from an emergency response to be able to get to me by air or by land. You know, we're talking about a few miles, 20, 30 miles, let's say, 40 miles. But also the way you ride, the way you apply yourself when you're riding would determine the chances of you having an accident. So if you're riding really fast off-road, you know, really trying to jump over things and, you know, go over rocky terrain at speed and all that kind of stuff, the chances are at some point you will fall off the bike and you will fall hard. Whereas if you're going slowly, the chances are you may fall off the bike at some point, you may drop the bike, I should say, and there's a kind of a difference there. it's like you just lose your balance and you can't keep the weight of the bike and it just topples over, as opposed to being flung off the bike. So if you drop the bike, then you can just step away from the bike and you won't get an injury. You know, or chances are very remote. So riding slowly in adverse conditions or difficult conditions actually has that benefit of increasing the safety buffer. If you apply the same principle to road riding, then wherever you are, if you have a lot of, give yourself a lot of time and space, if you moderate your speed or modulate your speed according to the conditions, if you're really observant of road traffic conditions, road traffic density, road conditions, that kind of thing, the way the roads are twisting, you know, left bends, right bends, are there high hedges, do you have good visibility in the roads, are there lots of junctions, side junctions, is there potential for anything external from your ride to affect you? It's that level of attention to your riding which will increase the safety buffer. Now, people will say, well, what about if you have a puncture, a blowout on your bike? Well, you're absolutely right. If there's something catastrophic were to happen, then the chances are obviously you will have, you know, come off the bike and you may get seriously injured. But you've got to look at the level of probability here. The level of probability of having a blowout on a especially on, well, any kind of modern tyre, but certainly a tyre that is well maintained, right pressures, so on and so forth, got a good tread pattern, hasn't aged too much, is not cracked. You know, the chances of that happening are so remote. You know, we're talking about in the millions and millions to one probability. So, you know, people can say, okay, what about if this happened? What about that happened? The reality is, if it did happen, yes, you would sustain injuries, quite likely, and depending on what level of protection you're wearing would determine the extent of those injuries to a certain degree. But however, we always have to go back to the first point where say, well, if you're going at really high speed and or moderate to high speed, I should say, and you hit something solid, regardless of what you're wearing, you will have very serious injuries, if not fatal injuries. So you've got to say, look at the probability of what accident or what accident you're likely to have, and also what injuries you're likely to sustain from it, and indeed what level of protection will work and won't work. So, you know, people will say, well, you've got to wear all the gear all the time. Well, yeah, that's true, but also it doesn't help you if you're riding like a lunatic either, and you've got no care in the world. So you can see lots of people wearing, you know, all the leathers, all the boots, gloves, whatever, all the most expensive helmets, protection, but they're riding as if they've just stole the bike, or they're riding with no consideration to what other vehicles might have now, or might be how other vehicles might be affecting their ride. Now, you've also got to factor for this. Now, lots of people, lots of riders will always like to blame other road users for motorcycle accidents. Now, the reality is, and this is reality, this is like a myth buster, if you like. The reality is that it kind of goes in a game of thirds. A third of all motorcycle accidents are solely down to the rider. They are a rider, you know, lost control on a bend, they were just going too fast, you know, lost traction, so on and so forth, lost control under braking, whatever it was. So that's purely rider's fault. Another third, let's say, is down to another external driver, let's say, of a vehicle that pulled out in front of a bike. They weren't expecting it, that kind of thing. And I'm being quite charitable there, you know, with that. But another third is a kind of combination of the two, where you've got external forces or other drivers, and also the motorcyclist or the rider that just didn't factor for that potential hazard that was developing, and so they didn't react in time. So it was kind of, you know, 50-50 split there, you know, on that third. So that basically says, which way, it depends which way you look at it, 2/3 of all motorcycle accidents, and probably even more than that, the rider had something to do with it. So it's not good enough to actually say to riders, to all road users, oh, you know, it's those damn drivers, it's those damn lorry drivers, those delivery drivers or whatever. Yes, there is problems with certain types of drivers or certain skill sets amongst drivers. However, if the rider is totally oblivious to those problems, then you've also got to blame the rider as well. You can't just say that somebody's at fault just because they're doing something wrong, when the rider is actually doing something wrong as well, by either not factoring for these kinds of issues, or also they are making it really difficult for drivers, I should say, to either see them because they're riding too fast, or they're riding in blind spots, or they're weaving in and out of traffic at such high speed that they could easily you know, hit another vehicle, or a vehicle could change lanes and they just haven't had time to, even if they've checked their mirrors, they haven't had time to actually see the oncoming motorcycle from the rear. So, you know, it's one of those things. You've got to, as a rider, you've got to analyze how you're riding, but also analyze how others are driving. And you've got to give drivers the chance to see you as a rider. If you could flip this on its head and you could actually say exactly the same for drivers, you know, they should think about their own driving, but also they should factor for other road users as well, especially motorcyclists and cyclists, if you want to go that far as well. So, you know, it is about driving and riding standards. It is about analysing how you're riding and driving, but it's also factoring how others are riding and driving. So many motorcycle accidents are caused by drivers and riders who are not applying this basic principle of how I'm riding or driving and how others are riding and driving. And also, what are the road conditions, so on and so forth. So let's say you know, riding in wet conditions or on the back roads, on the twisties, and you're not factoring for any sort of damp roads or wet roads. You're not factoring for muds. You're not mud on the road. You're not factoring for farm entrances, field entrances, animals coming out of the hedges, that kind of thing. So, you know, if you're just going hell for leather on those back roads, which is really fun, by the way, but at the same time, if you come a cropper, well, you've only got yourself to blame. You know, at the same time, if you're, you know, going hell for leather on the back roads and then all of a sudden, you know, you meet an oncoming vehicle and, you know, you go head-on collision, well, that's because you're riding too fast for those roads and you're not factoring that another vehicle, another slow-moving vehicle or a tractor or something like that might be coming the opposite direction. These are myths, what I was constantly working on when I had the Motorcycle Safety Initiative. And the reason I say they're myths, because I worked in emergency services for many, many years, dealt with, you know, over 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 motorcycle accidents in my career, and I could really identify with the riders and the accident scenario because I've been riding for 40 odd years myself. Now, you know, I did not try to put myself up as a safety guru or anything like that, but you could see that there was an equation here. There was an equation between how somebody was riding and how the accident happened. There was a cause and effect. And it was about how people are riding their bikes, how people are driving their cars or other vehicles, and what the road conditions were at the time, the weather conditions were, and what led to the accident. You know, somebody says that there's no such thing as an accident, you know, because that implies that nobody is at fault. You know, it's just an act of God. It's something that could never be determined. Well, that kind of applies to about 0.1, let's say, of 1%, let's say, of all road traffic accidents. The overwhelming majority are, there's a cause, there's a reason, somebody somewhere did something wrong or they didn't act in the appropriate way. So, you know, when you're talking about motorcycle safety or road safety, you really need to take a good look at yourselves, or ourselves. We need to look at ourselves. We need to look at why people have accidents in the first place. It's no good if you're a motorcycle rider and you've got a friend of yours or somebody else and they've been in an accident, or you've been in an accident, and you automatically blame the other road user or blame the road conditions. What you should be saying is, how did this accident happen? How did this crash happen? What are the factors that caused it? When you start analysing exactly everything on that, then you can use that information to tell your friends. And they can tell their friends, so on and so forth. It's a snowballing effect. If you want people to stop having motorcycle accidents, everybody, and this is from emergency workers, law enforcement, motorcycle riding groups, road safety campaigners, they need to start looking at the actual accident causes and the factors involved, as opposed to getting onto this blame game and blaming, oh, they were going too fast, or motorcyclists are just, reckless people, or everybody should be driving and riding at 10 miles an hour, or, this kind of thing. These are not solutions. These are band-aids that you're putting on things. These are labels that you're putting on. These are easy targets, but they're not helping anybody, because all they do is just get people to, first of all, they either disengage with riders and drivers. You're not actually teaching anybody anything. You're not creating an atmosphere of open discussion and open learning. What you're doing is saying, well, he's just said that I've been going too fast, and they're saying we should only ride at 20 miles an hour, and everybody's reckless, or drivers, we alienate each other, and we shouldn't be doing that. What we should be doing is actually getting to the root causes of all accidents. And then also look at, right, okay, so we have road safety professionals out there. What are they actually doing, and what are they teaching? What are they looking at as the root causes of accidents? And also traffic systems, traffic management, that kind of thing. Also look at motorcycle manufacturers, look at their safety programs, if you like, what they're looking in terms of safety, improving safety, motorcycle protection manufacturers as well, helmet, boots, so on and so forth, jackets, trousers, that kind of thing. What are they doing? What message are they sending out? Are they sending out a message of total protection, or are they sending out, actually, this is, we are part of the safety equation, if you like, the rider safety equation, but we need to reinforce better riding habits, or better driving habits if you're a car driver, of course. So then it comes down to education. It comes down to initial rider training, advanced rider training, and it goes ongoing rider training as well. Now, ongoing rider training can take many forms. It can be in the form of many forms, I should say. It could be online, it could be through magazines, online blogs, that kind of thing. We can reinforce this positive aspect of rider safety or greater rider awareness without it being, pointing the finger and saying, you're doing it wrong. This is about learning. This is about improving. This is about getting motorcycle clubs, if you like, all around the world, actually just having frank discussions with their members. This is about motorcycling groups, lobbying groups, to actually think about this in a better way as well, a more inclusive way, to discuss this amongst their members in a rational way, to actually say, okay, well, we're not going to be anti this just for the sake of being anti it, and we're not going to say we're totally against something else just because, hey, this is our position. There needs to be balance. There needs to be balance in every argument. There needs to be balance in everybody's point of view. And they need to see why, somebody in America, let's say, can have an accident, and then somebody on the other side of the world in Australia or India can have exactly the same accident time and time again. And then you wonder, why are same accidents, same scenarios happening all over the world? with the same kind of injuries, but totally different circumstances or totally different levels of protection. Why does that happen? Or you could bring it closer to home in a particular geographic location. Why do accidents happen, you know, on that stretch of road or on that at that time of year, so on and so forth. So let's say in the UK we have a massive spike here in the spring time. Right now we have a massive spike in motorcycle accidents because everybody gets, or not everybody, but the majority of riders get their bikes out of the garages on a more regular basis after the winter break. Let's say they're out on the roads a lot more, they get suckered into dry roads, sunny days, and all of a sudden getting out with their friends, and that's it. They're not used to the road conditions, not used to the hazards, they're not used to, you know, having that ride beneath them, that power beneath them. Then all of a sudden, you know, your skills are rusty. If you haven't ridden for a few months, your skills will be rusty. It's as simple as that. So you need to give yourself time to ease back into riding. Give yourself lots of time and space, you know, factor for all the hazards, factor for all the potential hazards, and just ride accordingly. You know, I've always said, if you actually give yourself lots of time and space between yourself and, you know, any fluctuations in the road, bends in the road, or any other vehicles, then actually speed isn't an issue. If you're on a, you know, a flat straight road or dead straight road, and you're going, let's say, ignore slightly if we can speed limits, but if we're going, let's say, at 150 miles an hour down a dead straight road with no crosswinds, and it's completely dry and it's a flat surface, then there shouldn't be a reason with particular training and ongoing training that you shouldn't be able to go at that speed with no problems at all. In fact, you can go 200 miles an hour. The bike will be inherently stable in a straight line. When you start deviating from a straight line, you start having bends, you have fluctuating roads, up and down, undulating roads I should say, you have cracks in the road, debris, potholes, when you have wet roads, so on and so forth. When you start changing or deviating from that straight road scenario, then you've got to factor in for speed. Speed then becomes an issue for the conditions and for the road, and then when you start adding in other traffic, levels of traffic, then you've got to consider how fast is appropriate, is suitable for those road conditions, weather conditions, and also the amount of traffic on the roads. That's what you've got to start looking at in terms of road safety, rider safety. Speed by itself isn't the issue. It's speed with everything else. And that's what we would talk about in terms of rider safety, appropriate speed for the conditions. You know, where other people or other agencies would just factor at that, and that's not strictly the case. You've also got to look at motorcycle suitability for the road as well. You know, so there are lots of accidents, not a great deal of accidents, but lots of accidents that are caused by people using their motorcycle in inappropriate conditions, or they're not suitable to the conditions. So let's say, for example, you'll take a road bike, with road tires, in off-road conditions, for example, very mud, very wet, and you're riding too fast. And when I say too fast, you can be riding at 15-20 miles an hour with that kind of bike and those kind of tires off-road. It's not going to work. The same can be said for an off-road bike being ridden on the road with big knobbly tires, let's say, and they're just not suited for a hard, really flat surface, especially with a bit of shine or a bit of dampness to the road. You can easily lose traction with those. So again, it's the suitability of the bike to the road and to the road conditions, how it's being ridden under those conditions, and obviously what speed as well. Lots of factors. This is a huge part of my life for 10 years, 10, 15 years actually. looking at motorcycle accident data, looking at all the motorcycle accidents that we went to, you know, on the emergency services unit, and also dealing with all the injuries and the fatalities, of course, but also seeing how the motorcycle protection was wearing, but also the attitudes towards motorcycle protection. You had the full spectrum of opinion, but you had very heavily loaded were the bookends. You'd have where people would say motorcycle protection, don't need it, don't want it, it's not going to help me whatsoever, blah blah blah. And then you have the other side where it's no, it's fantastic, it's everything, it's a complete force field, it's a shield around me that's going to protect me in every single way. Anytime anybody had an accident and they were wearing motorcycle protection, they said, oh yes, and motorcycle protection saved my life. No, it didn't. It was the dynamics of the accident that actually gave you the chance to have survivable injuries. People who succumbed to injuries or who had injuries from motorcycle accident who weren't wearing motorcycle protection, then people would say, well, they had those injuries because of they weren't wearing motorcycle protection. No, they had those injuries because of the motorcycle dynamics, the accident dynamics at the time. Motorcycle protection works for light impacts, light glancing blows, and to save the skin and skin tissue from extensive damage caused by road abrasion, that kind of thing, the road rash scenario. But anything else than that, really, some hard impacts, extensive tumbling motion, that kind of thing, any twisting of the limbs, you know, if your boot gets caught or your wrist gets caught, something like that, it can throw you off, and you know, no mountain protection will stop you having broken bones or tissue damage or ligament tendon damage or internal organ damage as well. Same can be said for your head and your face as well. It really depends on speed, and it really depends on what you hit at the same time. So if you have a full face helmet, that's going to give you the best protection as we know, but it's not necessarily going to protect you at higher speeds, you know, anything above 25, 30 miles an hour. You may survive the injuries, but you may not, you know. But the reality is, if you do hit your head without a helmet, then the chances are you are more likely to sustain an injury even at lower speeds. And that's the key thing, isn't it? It's whether you accept higher speeds or lower speeds. So again, if you're riding without a helmet, or you choose to ride with an open face helmet, which a lot of the time I do as well, you've got to moderate your speed, and you've got to really analyze how you're riding, give yourself lots of time and space, and try and get back to that straight line kind of riding mentality where you're saying, well, the way I'm riding, there isn't a reason why I should have an accident. You've factored in everything, all the hazards, everything that you can think of, and there shouldn't be a reason why you're having an accident. The more people that do that, the less likely you are to have an accident. Now, the reality is that most people will, whoever has an accident, you fall into the kind of 1 to 2% bracket of all people riding or driving vehicles, and they have an accident. You know, it's highly unlikely. But the thing is about motorcycle accidents, we know they do occur, and we know the injuries are quite extensive because of the fact of, you know, you're exposed on a bike. How you stop that from happening is how you view your riding, how you view others riding, you riding out with your pals. You know, how you view the road conditions, how you view other road users as well. The more interaction you have with other road users, the more that you have a better understanding of the pros and cons of riding on the road, and also the limitations of riders and drivers, the more equipped you will be to be able to anticipate, but also be able to deal with any hazards that are unfolding in front of you or around you. So you'd be surprised the amount of people that would still say, and even to this day would still say, that motorcycle accidents are, they're always caused by drivers. It's always the drivers. It's always the drivers. That just isn't the case. It's a myth. It's also a myth that motorcycle protection will protect you. It's a myth. It's a myth that you will always have really serious injuries coming off a motorcycle. It's a myth. It doesn't always work out that way. The probability is that you will have serious injuries, but it's not always the case. It's not always a foregone conclusion that, come off your motorcycle, you will sustain serious injuries. It really depends. It depends if luck is on your side, it depends on the protection you're wearing, depends on the speed you're going, depends what you hit, so on and so forth. So, so there are always lots of factors. There are lots of factors on why people have road traffic accidents in general, why people have motorcycle accidents, crashes, why people have motorcycle related injuries, so on and so forth. So there's lots of things in play here. So to put it down to one thing, let's say it's speed, that's, in my opinion, that's negligent. We shouldn't be talking in those terms. We shouldn't be talking in terms of rider safety about what the motorcycle protection that they're wearing, okay, as if it's going to save their life. People would look at the likes of motorcycle racers on a racetrack and they say, well, they're wearing all the motorcycle protective clothing, the race leathers, the helmets, the gloves, the boots, and everything like that. But what people fail to realise is that they're in a sanitised environment. In what I mean is they're on a racetrack that, yes, it's undulating, it's twists and turns, but it's flat and it's smooth and it's also prepared as well for racing as well, as best as it can be. The bikes are top, tip-top condition, but also the riders are elite as well. And they're riding at the envelope or past the envelope as well. But even if they have an accident or come off their bikes, the chances are they're just going to slide along the road and they don't actually hit anything until they actually get into the crash barrier. But by then, their speed has dramatically reduced. So what happens is that even if they're just riding along, the leathers protect them from road rash or track rash or whatever you want to call it. The barriers, the final stop barriers, the wall of tyres, if you like, is so far away from where they actually initially came off the bike that they can go into those areas and reduce speed, and they're unlikely to have very serious injuries. Now, that's not to say riders don't get serious injuries from time to time. Of course they do. We know they do. We know there have been fatalities in the past, of course. But it's very much reduced probability. Now, people will look at that and they'll say, well, if I dress like that and I've got my sports replica bike, then I should be safe as well. It just doesn't work like that. There was a very, very good safety campaign by an ex-racer, Mick Doohan, many years ago, where they had the riders on a racetrack and they superimposed lots of road furniture, let's say bus stops and benches and street lamps and all that kind of stuff, and people, the bikes would come off and crash and they would be hitting these things as well. And basically would say, well, on the racetrack we don't have the street furniture, so you've got to be more careful about if you did come off, you're likely to hit something. And that's exactly it. People don't factor for this. Other people would say, okay, well, do you know what, I don't ride a sports bike, so I'll be absolutely fine. That's the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard in my life as well. Because they would say that the majority of all accidents are sports bike riders. Well, it really depends where we're talking about. Are we talking about in this country? Are we talking about in Europe? Are we talking in the Middle East, the Far East, or are we talking in the United States? Because I think if you're in the United States, you're talking more American brands, let's say Harley, because it's a numbers thing. If you're talking in this country or around Europe, possibly, yeah, sports bike riders. If you're looking at the Far East, it's probably not going to be sports bike riders. It's going to be more like the lower CC bikes as well, which are people having accidents on because of the numbers involved, the numbers of those bikes involved over there. So you can't really say it's down to one particular brand of motorcycle. One is more safe than the other. People will say, I'm going to ride a Harley because I want to, you know, I want to be safer on the road. That's nonsense as well. It's how you ride the bike in the first place, how you interact with other vehicles, that kind of thing. Of course, certain bikes lend themselves to a certain style of riding, so you have to adapt the way you're riding that bike and the way they act under braking and cornering and so on and so forth. That's absolutely true. But to say one particular bike or one particular type of rider is safer than another is absolute nonsense. You know, you've got to look at the way you're riding, but also, as I always say, how you interact with other road users. If you're going past a lorry and you're just spending too much time past, you know, alongside a lorry, then at some point you're going to be in their blind spot and they're not going to know you're there. If you get too close to another vehicle when you're overtaking, the chances are they may change direction slightly, might get too close and push you off. You know, it just happens. You know, so when you're overtaking, the point is to not stay in that danger zone for too long. You know, set yourself up, make sure the area is clear, make sure the road ahead is clear, and make sure it's clear, not, you know, taking chances over brows of hills, around bends, that kind of thing. Make sure it's clear on a straight stretch road, then go for it. Pull out and go. You know, don't dilly-dally about. You know, if your bike is underpowered to make that kind of overtake, let's say you're a low cc bike and you've got a slow moving traffic, well, what you should do is just not go for the overtake. You should just hold back until you've got a long stretch of road where you might be able to get past. Okay, but if it's really where you're riding at speed where it's almost matched the vehicle in front, but you just want to get past them, then actually that's the time to take stock, sit back and just enjoy the ride, but not be so concerned about going for the overtake. You know, we've got to look at how we're teaching riders to think, how we're teaching riders to ride, of course, but how we're teaching them to think about making the right decisions. And it's all about decision making, you know, in rider safety terms, and actually about riding motorcycles and having fun on motorcycles. It's always about making those right decisions. Most of the time, the overwhelming majority of all riders get it right. Okay, you can't say that motorcyclists are unsafe. And you've also got to say the overwhelming majority of all drivers get it right as well. Okay, otherwise everybody would be crashing their cars and crashing their motorbikes every day. It just doesn't happen. So you've got to look at the percentage. But you've also got to allow for people to make mistakes. People are human. They will make mistakes. People are human. Well, of course they are. They're not donkeys, are they? Well, okay, maybe they are. But you know what I mean. So it's, you know, people will make mistakes. You've got to factor for people potentially making those mistakes as well. So, you know, when you're going out on the road for the first time, when you're not a, you know, all year round rider, or you know, if you are an all year round rider and you're going out, you've always got to look at these factors. Why do people have accidents? Why do people have injuries? Why are certain accidents occurring in certain geographic locations? Speak honestly about this. Let's get all the agencies together. Let's talk about this in an open and frank manner. Stop putting labels and things. Stop blaming other people and certain conditions or certain riding types or styles or different types of people. You know, it's not always the case. But you know, say, you know, we live in a world where we're constantly trying to find answers and we're trying to find reasons to not blame ourselves for certain things. But the one person that you can blame or you can look at, you can analyze, is always yourself. So no matter what ride you do, you say from point A to point B, I did this ride. When you finish your ride, say, how did that ride go? Did I like it? Did I didn't like it? Was I a bit hard on the braking there? Could I have taken that a little bit wider, that bend, so on and so forth? Was that overtake okay? Did I get a bit too close to the vehicle? This is something I do all the time with my ride. I'm analysing as I'm going along, but I'm also analysing after the ride as well. I think sometimes I'm totally honest with myself. I'll say, you rode like a complete twat. And then other times you think, oh, okay, yeah, I did that okay. I seek to get better each time I ride. And I've been riding 40 years and I still seek to get better with each and every ride. Doesn't matter how long I've been riding. Okay, I'm never quite comfortable in saying to anybody, I'm a great rider. I would never say I'm a great rider. In fact, I would always say I'm pretty much an average rider. But what I do is I aim to get better at each one, and I aim to not make the same mistakes over and over again. But I also give myself lots of space and time. Always analysing the traffic, the road conditions ahead. Doesn't mean I don't, use speed to my advantage. Doesn't mean that I don't filter through traffic. Doesn't mean that I, try and get somewhere as quickly as I can within the speed limits, let's say. All that kind of stuff. But, I hate the word making progress, as a lot of advanced riders would say, you're going to make progress, because that kind of gives the impression that you should be getting somewhere at all costs. I know it's not intended to be that way, but the way that message is delivered to newer riders or newer riders in the advanced world is to say, yeah, make progress. You've got to go for this overtake. You've got to get here and get round vehicles because you're on a motorbike and you're thinner and so on and so forth. Well, that just because you can doesn't mean you should, and just because you should doesn't mean you need to. So that's one of the things. People should ride their own rides and ride on whatever they feel happy doing so. If they want to stay back and sit behind a vehicle the whole time, if they want to go for a leisurely ride, fine. They don't have to make progress. This is all nonsense. But what I'm saying is you can use the bike and use your riding skills to get through traffic or just go on a great ride. But you're going at your own pace, and you're going with the pace or with the hazards that are developing. You're anticipating, so you're manoeuvring to avoid those the whole time. Sometimes you do that with pace, sometimes you do that with manoeuvring, sometimes you do that with just holding back as well. Right, anyway, so this has been, well, I suppose a podcast about motorcycle safety, really, and what your views on it. As I say, there's always been lots of myths about rider safety. There's always been myths about why crashes occur, what the causes are, and who to point the finger at, who to blame, for the accident. Whether it's car drivers blaming riders, whether it's riders blaming drivers. I always give lots of media interviews on this basic subject, and even the people on the radio or the television, the news, they would be asking me questions, but they had their own agendas of what they thought motorcycle safety was. Then they'd interview people from the rider training world, road safety world, all this kind of stuff, but nobody was actually interviewing the people who went to the motorcycle accident scenes, and nobody was asking the people who actually had the accident, okay, let's make these findings public, let's try and teach the world why people are having these accidents, because people are so worried about not pointing the finger at somebody that they think, okay, no, we've always got to say it's somebody else's at fault. Nobody's going to the police and saying, right, you've got the details of this accident, let's make it public. After the court cases, whatever, let's just make this data public. What happened? Why did it happen? Nobody has access. I was the first one in the emergency services world in the UK to actually start looking at this. Well, it would be starting nearly 20 years ago now, to actually start looking at this and trying to put out information. And it took a few years to gather that information in a proper coordinated way, and then to deliver it through a motorcycle safety initiative, or this campaign which I ran, this Helibikes. Much of the articles, as I say, which I wrote in literature in support of that campaign, and lots of accident scenarios, are now on the RevelatorAlf website, RevelatorAlf.com. If you go to the resources page, it's all down there in a list. Free downloads, just click on the link and away you go. Some of the other top links, you can actually sign up to the email distribution list if you wish, but those safety articles are all free downloads. It's just click on the link and it's a download, PDF download. So, there was lots of work that was involved in that. process. But one of the frustrations that I had was, the fundamental point was that the data from accident crash sites or motorcycle crash sites was not being released. People did not know that. People were in this perpetual state of blaming other people. They were living in a dream world, in a myth that, you know, accidents were caused, you know, by certain things. Media outlets, you know, news, television, newspapers, radios, all constantly reinforcing this myth that, you know, depending who they were talking to, they would say, oh yes, it's the drivers, although it's the bikers, whatever. Nobody's actually achieving anything. And that's what annoyed me the most about anything. You know, I would try and speak to other safety professionals. I would try and speak to the emergency services. I would try and speak to you know police, law enforcement, to actually get a coordinated effort. But nobody seemed to be that interested. Nobody seemed to be that interested to actually get down to the real causes. So in the end, I had to just produce it all myself. And for a while, it worked. But again, you know, it needs some bigger agencies. It needs the system, if you will, the system to embrace this and take it on. And in some ways, I suppose it has slightly improved. But, you know, it goes in cycles as well. Then you have a whole raft of new generation of riders coming in who've never heard of this stuff, who never even factored for this. They just get on the bike, away you go. So really then it comes down to, okay, we've got to go right back to the very beginning. Education. And it's not just rider instruction. We've got to go further back from that. We've got to go back to road sense education. Then, you know, right from when we're very young, when children are very young, let's teach them about road safety from a very young age. And it's not, we're not talking about road safety and green cross code man and look left and all right, which is all great stuff, don't get me wrong. But it's about that appreciation of where you are, what hazards are around you, what can you do to avoid them or to anticipate them, or to react to them in the you know, when they develop. It's this kind of conditioning of people that we need to incorporate. So when they actually come to actual initial rider training, motorcycle training, that they've already got a good understanding of what it takes to be a safe rider and to have good motorcycle safety. Then they won't be so heavily invested in buying the latest motorcycle safety protection and the best motorcycle they can, but actually they can't ride for toffee, or they're a really unsafe rider. You know, because actually it doesn't make, you know, if you're a really unsafe rider but you've got all this extra stuff, that at some point you're going to crash. It's just a question of time. You're going to crash and you're going to do yourself an injury, or you're going to, and worse, you're going to kill yourself. That happens all the time. Now we all like this kind of view of, yeah, riding free, riding safe, man. Oh, I'm not wearing a helmet, and yeah, I'm just going to ride what I want. I'm going to ride in t-shirt and shorts and whatever. I'm going to ride. Well, look, if that's what you want to do, then fine. I'm not here to tell you you should not be riding. You should always wear a helmet. This all depends, obviously, where you are in the world and if the laws allow you to not wear a helmet, of course. Or, you know, what clothes you can wear. You want to flip-flops, you know. If that's what, you know, is your bag, if you like, if that's what you think is good for you, then it's up to you. But don't come running to me or anybody else, you know, bleating on about, oh, I got injuries and everything like that. Well, you should know that yourself. You know, it's about actions, it's about consequences, cause and effect. You know, if you have a motorcycle protection on, but you're riding like a lunatic, it's not going to do you any good. But if you're riding appropriately, safer, slower, let's say, riding to the conditions, and you are wearing any form of motorcycle protection, it doesn't have to be full-bodied, then the chances are you'll minimise that. If you're not wearing nothing at all and you come off your bike, then you will have some kind of injuries. So what I'm saying is, if you are one of those people who say, I don't want to wear a helmet, I'm just going to wear flip-flops and shorts and sandals and all that sort of stuff and t-shirt, then you've got to ride a lot slower. Because it's just like when I go riding off-road. If I went riding off-road with the size of bike that I've got, that's big and heavy, and I was going over all these ruts and everything like that, and I was going too fast, I will lose the bike quite easily. You'll lose the front tire and you'll be flipped off and you will get injured, or I will get injured. So that's because I slow down to a crawl's pace when I'm in the tricky stuff. When I'm on the tricky stuff, tricky conditions, any surface that isn't flat, hard and compacted, that's when you slow right down, on off-road that is. It's the same principle. You know, if you're not wearing any protection, you've really got to slow down. You've really got to factor, you know, for if you had an accident, what would happen. And if you do fall off and you're not wearing anything, then you've only got yourself to blame. You know, you can't blame anybody else. You know, you've got yourself to blame. But look, avoid the accident in the first place. You know, avoid it. You know, people will say about, you know, the kids going out doing stunt riding on the roads and everything like that, popping wheelies and going really high speeds and everything. I'm not against stunt riding at all. I think it's great. I think it looks great and everything like that. I don't agree with doing it on the public roads, but off-road in, you know, private car parks, you know, whatever, great. I think it's great. I think it's great fun to do it. I think it's great for kids, you know, whatever age. Once you've got the licenses, whatever. And if they want to wear protection, great. If they don't, they don't. That's up to them. But as soon as you start doing it on the main road, then you're actually taking your risk and your hazard to other people. And you're also taking the lack of protection that you're wearing, because a lot of these kids are not wearing any rider protection at all. They're just going on t-shirts and they're popping wheelies and doing all sorts of stoppies, whatever, on the main roads. The chances are at some point you will get hit and you will get really hurt. And it happens. It's not something I'm making up. This does happen, you know, so wherever you are in the world. So, you know, this has been a bit of a podcast. I know this has been a ramble. But look, we're looking at the time of year when people have lots of accidents, lots of crashes, as I say. They get their bikes out for the first time. There's lots of reasons why people have accidents. It's not just down to one thing. You know, there are lots of reasons why car drivers fail to acknowledge and see motorcyclists. But we've had a really big good campaign over many years in the UK and around Europe, and the level of driving and awareness of drivers for motorcyclists has vastly improved compared to what it used to be many years ago. You know, if you start to engage with drivers at a decent level, as opposed to pointing the finger, if you actually educate everybody, it's a mutual respect. You know, we're both sharing the road. We're, you know, both road users. You know, they are going to be more receptive. We're going to be more receptive to what they're doing, what they need from us, so on and so forth. If we start acting like that, we start sharing the road, being mutually respectful, not wishing to blame each other all the time, you will find that when you actually are filtering, let's say, given a given scenario, that cars actually divide. They actually move out of the way most of the time for you. Not always, but a lot of drivers are doing it now. A lot of drivers are really conscientious. They're looking in their mirrors. They're saying, there's a motorcycle coming here. They're filtering through. I'm just going to move out of the way to make them, you know, give them a bit more space. As you ride by, give them a wave. Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. They've done something great for you because they're aware of motorcyclists. You should do something good for them by actually acknowledging them and saying thanks. You know, it's about sharing mutual respect. The more we do that, the better it will be for us all. You know, you know, if you have an accident, or have a crash, I should say, you get sort of socialised into using the word accident. It isn't an accident, it's a crash. If you have a motorcycle crash, then, and you have a crash with another vehicle, there's only going to be one winner. There's only going to be one winner. Okay, you're not going to come out on top. So to think that you will is nonsense. You know, so to anything that you can do to avoid that crash in the first place, to keep yourself in the saddle, to keep rolling on, to keep, you know, getting onto your destination, to enjoy the ride, keep on rolling to enjoy the ride. You do whatever you want, to do, but you've got to live by those consequences, and you've got to take the appropriate actions to say, keep on rolling on, keep yourself safe out there, because nobody else is going to do it for you. You've got to be responsible for your own actions and embrace everything, all the positives and all the negatives, and engage with the system, engage with, you know, the environment in which you're riding as well. Okay, switch on to it as opposed to switch off from it. You know, we like to think that we can go on a bike and we can you know, ride free and leave all our worries behind, and it's a big stress buster and all that kind of stuff. It is. It absolutely is, no doubt. But at the same time, you've got to engage your brain into riding safely. And rider safety isn't a dirty word, it isn't a boring word, it isn't something that we should view as, oh God, it's the safety Nazi again. Do you know what? I hate the safety Nazis as well. I hate those people who make these statements. Hate is a very strong word. I kind of disagree, let's put it that way. I disagree with people who, you know, come out with all these statements about rider safety. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, and speed is bad, and, you know, helmets are good, and, you know, all motorcyclists are bad, all that kind of stuff. You know, I totally disagree with everything that they say. I totally disagree with a lot of rider programs, or, you know, advanced rider programs, and not necessarily what they're teaching. It's how the message is being passed on, and the attitudes of within certain groups as well. That we are a certain group and we're never going to have an accident because we are fantastic. Absolute nonsense. Okay, you're still missing the vital point. And if people are so good at not having accidents, then why is it over the years I've gone to accident or crash sites, I should say, with members from those groups involved? Members from the emergency services, from police, been involved in motorcycle crashes, advanced rider groups, been in motorcycle crashes, from safety campaigners, been in motorcycle crashes. The fact is, we can all have an accident, we can all have a crash at any time. If we switch off slightly, we're not completely 100% engaged, and it takes work, it takes effort to do it. You know, and it's not about just saying, okay, I'm going to go for a leisurely ride. It's about being engaged in that moment, being engaged with the ride, and what is going to affect you on that ride. Okay, because really you can't rely on anybody else, you can only rely on yourself. You are sitting on top of a machine that can hurl you down the road at 100, 150 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, whatever it is. So you are in complete control of that ride. It's no autopilot. You know, you are the person who controls that, so you ultimately have the responsibility to ride it accordingly, and to be able to deal with anything that comes your way, and to ride it appropriately for the conditions and the weather or whatever it is. Anyway, so that's it. Look, it's this time of year, we're going to have lots of accidents going through the summer and into the autumn. The next 6 months, it's just going to be happening. All we can do is just keep on putting out this content, keep on putting out this message to groups, all groups, and individual riders out there. You know, you don't have to be part of a group to embrace this kind of knowledge. You don't have to be part of a select elite to be able to embrace this. You know, this is actually about you as an individual rider. What are you going to do to keep on riding safely and improve your rider safety, improve your motorcycle safety, improve your rider awareness to actually avoid the accident in the first place, or the crash in the first place. And that's what you've always got to do. You've always got to focus on avoidance rather than reacting to or hoping that any motorcycle protection will protect you. Focus on the avoidance and add those other layers on afterwards. But the avoidance is the key. Okay, right. Well, I think I've rambled on enough for today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. As I say, it's all on Spotify, iTunes, and SoundCloud. So go check out the website, RevelatorAlf.com. Sorry for all the links in the sidebar there. If you're watching the video, then check out the description below as well. And if you like, share and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. Tell all your friends about the podcast. That'd be really good. Really appreciate it. Right, catch you on the next one coming soon. Lots more varied topics coming up, not necessarily always about motorcycles on these podcasts, but they'll be coming thick and fast. Cheers now.